Hello, I'm Frank Renton. I'm a broadcaster for BBC Radio 2 and a conductor. But for the purposes of this interview, I was the second cornet player in the Black Dyke Band from 1953 to 1957. It all seems very easy, really. My mum was half Italian, Sissi Pagotto by name, and she wanted me to have an interest in music. So when I was 7, I started piano lessons in the village of Idle, just the other side of Bradford. When I was 10, I discovered an Uncle Harold, or at least my father's uncle, who was a professional trumpet player. And on my 10th birthday, he turned up at the house, gave me an old Higham cornet, and off I went. And never looked back. I took to playing the cornet and trumpet like a duck to water. When I was 12, I played the second and third movements of the Haydn Trumpet Concerto in London at the Wigmore Hall at a concert by the Music Teachers Association. Which was not bad progress for from 10 to 12. And I also auditioned for Black Dyke when I was 12 years old. I came here into the band room, played for Willie Lang and Alex Mortimer, who was the conductor at the time. And they both said, yeah, fantastic, you're a great player, but you wear short pants. We don't have any people with short pants in Black Dyke at the moment. So I went to the junior band. But music, right from being 10 years old. There was never anything else. There was never any chance of my doing anything else. My dad wanted me to be an electrician, as he was, but that was going to be no career for me. You got your hands dirty, for goodness sake. So music has always been right at the core of my life. Through teachers. My first teacher, proper teacher, was a man called Frank Haig. Frank had been in the Black Dyke during the war years. And then my next teacher was Ken Aiken-Jones, always known in the business as Ken Aiken-Bones. Ken came out of the Royal Air Force, auditioned for Black Dyke, didn't get the job, but went to play for the Yorkshire Electrical Welding Company band, the UCO band, which strangely enough was in Idle, where I lived. And when I wasn't playing for Black Dyke Juniors, I went out and did a rehearsal for the UCO band because Gershom Collinson, their conductor, was a really nice man. And so I had lessons with Ken Aiken-Jones. And it was through Ken and Frank Haig and playing in the local band and playing for the Black Dyke Junior Band, which I did from the age of 12 to 14. And it was obvious that at some time when they needed a cornet player and I'd started wearing long trousers, that I'd go from the junior band to the senior band. And that's what happened. How important is it? Do you know, I don't think it is at all. I think because nobody knows now that there was a Black Dyke Mills here, it's just a piece of ground. It's just the name. In fact, it's not even called that. It's the Black Dyke Band. It was important for 100 years that the Mills supported the band. Many of the people who played in the band were employed by the Mills. The Mills supported them, the directors supported them. But then it became obvious that the wool trade wasn't going to survive, and with the wool trade going, so the mill went, so the band had to find a new way to survive. And it survives now not because of the mill or because of its heritage, but because of its musical excellence. The highlight for me had got to be at the end, the last thing I ever did with the band. I started, as I said, in 1953. They'd lost Willie Lang. Willie Lang had gone to the orchestral world, a principal cornet player, genius of a cornet player, and they really couldn't find anybody else to replace him that was better than David Pratt. David worked in Bradford as a wool sorter, was a very highly organised man, a very good cornet player. So he took over the end chair until they could find somebody better than him, and that left a space down the section, and I came in as a teenager in as second cornet. It was immediately obvious that I was a man among... it was immediately obvious that I was a boy among men. They treated me like a boy, but they also treated me like an equal. I had to play my part. If I couldn't play my part, they'd get somebody else. And we had a great band, and everything they did taught you the way forward, the way things had to be. But the highlight had to be 1957, when we'd had a good band for 3 or 4 years, and then they found the solo cornet player they were looking for in Maurice Murphy. He came over from the Fairy Band to take over as principal cornet, and was another genius. another man who could lead from the front without seemingly doing anything, just playing. And following him came George Wilcox, Major George Wilcox, who'd retired from the army. And Harry Mortimer had got involved in conducting brass bands with the Fairy Band. He came across to conduct Black Dyke shortly after Morris joined us. And in 1957 we went to the British Open. And what had been a very good band became a great band. Everyone, every single one of them. There was nobody in this band that wasn't an absolute character, somebody who stood out, was absolutely independent of mind, but all prepared to give everything they'd got to get the middle right. The bass players were all quite elderly men. Sitting on my left was Owen Bottomley, who'd been solo cornet player of Black Dyke in the years before and during the war, had played in slow melody and solo contests against Harry Mortimer. Everybody in the band, Geoffrey Whittam, larger than life euphonium player, Willie Lang, and then David Pratt, the principal cornet, the great Tommy Waterman, the soprano cornet player, who had immensely long legs and arms and looked like something like a praying mantis when he played, but by could he play. Sam Smith, the flugelhorn player, Jeff Bairstow, the Repiano cornet player, genius player. Everywhere you looked, they were guys who were in their own right. They could have gone to any band in the business, but Black Dyke was their band. And they stuck around here. Gordon Sutcliffe, the solo horn player, absolutely outspoken man. If you couldn't live with Gordon Sutcliffe telling you what to do, you might as well go away and hide under a stone. They were hard taskmasters. For a teenager like me coming into the band, it was, on one hand, it was like going into a magical cave of all this fantastic experience coming out towards you. On the other hand, if you didn't have a strength of character yourself, it could be very intimidating. You ask about characters. I was awarded, as a 14-year-old, I had a band father. And my band father was Charlie Emmett, one of the E-flat bass players. His brother Jack, his younger brother Jack, eventually came to conduct the band. But on the first job that I did, I'd done a couple of rehearsals, then the Saturday night we had a job. And I was told to report here to the band room half an hour before the coach time. And I came into the band room and I was inspected by Charlie Emmett. Shoes clean, black socks, trousers pressed, jacket done and brushed to one to another, overcoat for in the bus, cap to wear in the bus because you wore a proper hat when you were in the bus, cornet, mutes, music, everything ready to go, everything fine. I'd really taken care. And then I said to Charlie, and now what do I do, Mr. Emmett? He said, you go sit in the bus and wait for the men. How about that? Imagine that happening now. In those days we were Queensberry. The mill was Queensberry. There was not a lot else happened here. They were the biggest employers. We were the contact between the mill, if you like, the social interface, to use contemporary language. And everybody knew who we were. Many of the players lived in Queensberry. They walked to the band room. It was unusual for me. I came from the other side of Bradford, so I had to catch a bus into Bradford, walk across the city, catch the bus out to Queensberry, and on that same bus would be 3 or 4 other players who'd come from different parts of West Yorkshire. But many of the players lived in Queensberry and worked at the mill. If I told you the truth, I'd be hung, drawn and quartered. We didn't have a musical director as such until George Wilcox came. Over a couple of years, we had first of all a man called Edmund Hoole, who had come to us from the Warncliffe Choralery Band and was a tall, very imposing figure with a wonderful stick technique based on that of Adrian Bolt, long baton with a rubber around the handle. But really, I discovered early on that he didn't know a lot about music. And then we had Jack Emmett came after that, and Jack Emmett was very well organised, but he wasn't a daring conductor. 2 years into my time at Black Dyke, I passed my audition and went into the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain. So suddenly I'd been transposed from playing second cornet in a brass band, where you took a long time to rehearse everything and bring it to perfection, to suddenly I'm in an orchestral trumpet section. Our teacher was Ernest Hall, the great Ernest Hall, who taught every great trumpet player in the country. And I discovered that getting things right was nothing to do with the conductor. Getting things right was my business as the player. The conductor's job was to make music, whereas in the band room, the conductor was the man who forced you to get it right, if you like. So it was a very different relationship between the conductor and the musician that I didn't get in Black Dyke until, of course, George Wilcox came. And he did the rehearsals leading up to the Open, and then went on the Open and created a magical performance. And that was the first time in a brass band I'd seen the power of somebody of great vision. Everybody knows about Le Roi Dix and Geoffrey Whittam, but Geoffrey Whittam was just a wonderful player. Willie Lang was the solo cornet player that was leaving as I joined, but I knew Willie, had heard him play. He was just a momentous player, went on to be principal trumpet of the Halley Orchestra and then the London Symphony Orchestra. Maurice Murphy, what a player. I don't think the band had heard anybody like him when he came. And seemingly could play forever. Played a solo in the first half, solo in the second half, played all the solos in all the pieces, played all the tutties, never backed off. Went straight off to be principal trumpet of the BBC Northern, and from there followed Willie Lang into the London Symphony Orchestra. Absolute titans. Grenville Richmond on trombone. Tommy Wartham, as I said, the soprano cornet players, but unsung heroes as well. People like John Slinger, the baritone player, absolutely wonderful player. Gordon Sutcliffe, the solo horn player, led the horn section with such a towering sound. The first horn player I'd ever heard who made that immensely impressive middle sound that the band sound was built on. And of course we talked about David Pratt, who was something of an unsung hero. He carried the band through those 3 years between Willie Lang and Maurice Murphy, and was just a wonderful player. Well, the biggest challenge was we'd got this band and we couldn't create performances, and we couldn't create performances because we didn't have conductors who knew how to do it.
Start that one again. Go.
The biggest challenge that we'd got a great band, we'd got great players everywhere, but we didn't have great conductors. We were using bandmasters to conduct us at the major competitions rather than conductors. So we had people who could organise the performance, but they couldn't create performance, if you know what I mean. The difference is when you go on, you take all the raw materials that you put together in the rehearsal room, and then on stage you create performance. People like Alex Mortimer could do that. People like George Wilcox, when he came, could do that. So when they stopped using the resident conductor to do everything and started bringing in professional people, bringing outside influence, the same band became a tremendous band. And that was the biggest difficulty in my time.
So how did playing change your life, Frank?
Well, it gave me a life. Playing was everything. If you think that I went to a grammar school in Bradford, but virtually every night of the week I was playing somewhere. I was also building up a solo career as a trumpet player, doing concerts all over the place in my own right. I was a member of the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain for my last 2 years with Black Dyke. So even though I was at grammar school and hoping to go into the sixth form and then to go on to college to study to be a professional musician or to go on to university, as it happened I went to the Royal Manchester College of Music, there was hardly anything in my life but playing. It was an everyday existence. They're the brand leader. They're the most famous brass band in the world. At the moment, they're not the number one band in the world. I can once remember a man in Switzerland who headed up the Obrasso organisation, and he said the importance of Black Dyke is that if Black Dyke turned up in Switzerland playing black instruments, by next morning I'd have sold 100 sets of Black Instruments. He said, everybody wants to be like Black Dyke. If you look at Denmark, their band movement started from Black Dyke doing a tour over there. Wherever they've gone, they've left the message that this is a great way of making music and it's fun to do. And things have grown throughout the world. They have been the brand leader for as long as anybody can remember. I think about it constantly because as a broadcaster, I've got to think about audience figures and how this kind of music is presented to the world. And I think those that lead the brass band world have got to think very carefully. Everything has changed. When I started playing, we did concerts every weekend, quite often out of doors. And in the 1950s, there wasn't much else for people to do. Television was in its infancy. The recording industry was in its infancy. Bands were what people listened to. Now, television and perfect product. If you think of the trouble that goes into creating programs for television, that you press a button on a box in the corner of the room and 24 hours a day you get this perfect product on about 100 channels. The recording industry has changed everything. Everything that you record has got to be absolutely pristine. Otherwise, it's going to sound second rate. So the brass band has got to think very clearly how it presents itself in that changed world. And too often I think bands think they can just keep doing it the way they've always done it and it will work. And it patently won't, because there are still lots of people making music in brass bands, but there are less people listening, and that's the problem. I was once told by Harry Mortimer that you can play as loud as you want, but if it isn't a good sound, nobody will listen. And if you play very quietly and you've got a great sound, then everybody will listen. And I think that's the greatest advice ever. If you think of all the great players down the years that have been here, Maurice Murphy, Willie Lang, Jimmy Shepherd, Phil McCann, Roger Webster, Richard Marshall, they can all do wonderful things, but at the core of everything they do, they've got a great sound. And I think we sometimes forget that. And I think young players need to be taught that listeners soon get fed up of pyrotechnics and athleticism, that the thing that captures the listener is the sound. It was the greatest privilege to play for Black Dyke as a young man. I think what I learned in this band room from those great people who were all in the band when I came and were still here when I left, I think what I learned from them has been a guiding principle throughout my musical life. And basically, there are no grey areas in music. It's either right or it's wrong. And if it isn't right, it's wrong. So you might as well get it right.